Em pleno século XXI, as mulheres ainda sofrem com a
21st century, women still suffer from discrimination at work or at society at large. During the history of humanity, several women have fought to have rights that are the same as men. Since 1921, there is an international organization with the mission of contributing to the development and valuation of women and to preserve traditions and Jewish Zionist tradition. This is Naamat, founded in Israel by idealist women who believed in social justice. In 1948, the Namat Brazil was founded in Porto Alegre, an organization bringing together several sectors of society, education, community, centers that in Israel supports nurseries, technical schools, and offers scholarships. Namat Brazil integrates Judaism in the larger communities. It is present in 7 cities from the north to the south of the country, and our volunteers work on social and educational actions, putting into practice the principles of women's empowerment. This is a centennial movement that, since its foundation, had very famous women like Golda Meir, and presently services hundreds of children, women in Israel and throughout the world. Come and make a difference as well. Support Namat Brazil social projects. A good evening to all of you. I'm extremely happy today for 2 reasons. First of all, because we are launching the 3rd edition of Art and Artists. We have replicas of very renowned artists, and these replicas are acquired by people to give as gifts or for themselves. And through this, we are able to collect money for our social projects. Today, we are offering at an extremely lower price compared to the normal price these replicas for people who would like to purchase these works of art between today and tomorrow after the live. Once again, you can do this tomorrow the entire day. Now, the amount paid for any of these replicas is 260 reais. We have some from Tarsila do Amaral, a Lua, Composição, and O Lago, and from Inos Corradin, the Equilibrist, the Island of Fishermen, and Moon in the Mediterranean. These are beautiful works of art, very beautiful copies, and whoever buys during this period on Thursday will participate through Namat YouTube in a contest for a sculpture made by Inos Corradin. This was offered to us so we could raffle it between you. It is made of natural terracotta, and you can see the measurements on the screen. Once again, a very beautiful sculpture that refers to Inos Corradin's work. We will be showing this to you further on. Now, I would like to present to you the 3 people that will be part of this live. We have Tarsilinha do Amaral, the grandniece of the painter Tarsila do Amaral. Tarsilinha has a bachelor in law from PUC and in museologist from Maki. She is a speaker specializing in the life and work of the painter Tarsila do Amaral, the executive director of the company Tarsila do Amaral Enterprises that brings together the heirs of Tarsila and is taking care of the legacy of the artist. We have some books written by her, Tarsila by Tarsila and Abapuru. She has worked as a curator in several exhibitions, among them Tarsila do Amaral, Percurso Afetivo at the stock market in Brazil. Tarsila do Amaral, an effective trajectory at the Oscar Niemeyer Museum in 2008 in Curitiba. Tarsila, an effective trajectory at the Cultural Center of the Bank of Brazil in Rio de Janeiro in 2012, with a record of public with more than 220,000 visitors and a world record of audience on a single day of exhibition. She was responsible for the feasibility of Tarsila's exhibition, Inventing Modern Art in Brazil, and the Art Institute of Chicago in 2017, and at the MoMA in New York in 2018, and the exhibition Tarsila Popular at MASPI in 2019. Presently, she's working on a series on Tarsila with the producer Guillen and creating a firm with the English Bedlam producer. Hello, Tarsilinha. Is everything okay? I would simply like to greet you, and subsequently I will speak about the other artists as well as of Jacob Klintowitz, and then we will go back to our live. Simply for you to get to know her, this is Tarsilinha do Amaral. It is a pleasure to be here with you, a truly very pleasant activity. Thank you, Tarsilina. We're now going to speak about Jacob Klintowitz. He is a writer, an art critic, and the author of 188 books on artists, the theory of art, anthologies, books of arts, and fiction. He wrote approximately 3,000 articles and columns published in the Tribuna da Imprensa Rio de Janeiro, Jornal da Tarde São Paulo, and the News of Global Television. 4 times around, he was awarded by the Brazilian Association of Art Critics for his critical work. From the National Faculty of Right, he received an award as well for his defense of freedom of expression. He is a curator of hundreds of exhibits in Brazil and abroad. Among his most important books, we have Art and Communication, The Non-Existing Color, and The Apprentice of What is New, Vicente do Rego Monteiro, a look on the decade of the 60s, the re-sacralization of art, and from art, 22 Brazilian artists and anthology. Jacob, it is a pleasure to have you here with us today. If you want to greet the audience, please do so. It is a great pleasure to participate in this event, and I think that all of these lives and meetings of important people who are thinking about our reality throughout the world as being a feast of culture and a feast of pleasure. Basically, all of this speaks about the creation of a new type of being, a new type of mankind, and we continue to produce despite the great disasters that we have been facing. Thank you, Jacob. Welcome once again. And now I would like to introduce to you Inos Corradin, the highly expected artist today. He is a painter of international renown with his work disseminated throughout the world. He was born in Bologna in Piemonte, Italy, and he lived in France, where he remained until he was 5. The family then returned to Italy, to Castelbando, the province of Padova. He spent his childhood and youth in that small city until he was 20 years old, when once again accompanied by his parents, he came to Brazil. Now, this experience and his special look upon life are translated in the richness of his work, in his fantastic creativity, and in the playfulness of his artistic communication with the world and with people. The first individual exhibition took place at Galeria Sumaré in Bahia in 1953. Throughout these years of a great deal of work, we have had a great number of exhibits in Brazil and abroad, such as in United States, Argentina, Canada, Germany, Austria, Italy, Switzerland, Israel, Uruguay, France, Holland, among several other countries. His trajectory throughout these more than 65 years locates him among the great Brazilian artists of present days. In his work, there is that trademark of his style, a peculiar language that enables us to identify this is Inos. Inos Corradin does not stand still. Today, at 95 years of age, he continues to have a very good output. Good evening, Inos. It is a pleasure, an enormous pleasure to have you with us. Welcome. It's my pleasure to be here. Wonderful. I think it's our pleasure, but we're still very happy to know that you are pleased with this. And good evening to Tarsilinha. It is a pleasure to be here with you. And Jacob, also a pleasure to have you here with us. Jacob is a wonderful critic, a wonderful art critic. Inos, to begin, we would like to know some more about you. When you arrived in Brazil, how long you have been in Brazil, and which is your link with Israel, with the Jewish community, and what is it that you can tell us about this? When I arrived in Brazil, I very, very soon received an invitation to work in a studio that was called Lo, I believe. Well, this was a studio in Sao Paulo, and it was managed by some Argentines. We had Mr. Leal, that is to say, a group of extremely renowned artists, and I received the invitation to go to Bahia, to visit Salvador, Bahia. From an art critic. I don't remember his name. What was the name of this art critic? Well, it doesn't matter. He was an art critic. So I held my first exhibition in Oxumaré, the gallery in Salvador, Bahia. At that time, we had a great deal of visual artists from Sao Paulo, from Rio de Janeiro, all of which would go to Bahia, because Bahia was a very important artistic hub in Brazil. I also had an exhibition in Oxumaré. And to be able to sell my paintings at that time, I used to sell paintings. If you bought one, I would give you two. One would go as a present. It was difficult to sell paintings, and this enabled me to eat something that I really wanted to eat. It is a chicken cooked in its own blood. And now I'm sick of it when I look at this on the menu. When I see there is that chicken cooked in its own blood, I feel slightly disgusted. It was a beautiful exhibition. It was also highly criticized by the art critics of the time. And after Bahia, I received an invitation for the fourth centennial of ballet in the city of Sao Paulo. This was in 1954, and I worked as a scenographer for ballet. I worked for 1 year with ballet as a scenographer. Ensuing this, I began once again to work with my first person who had hired me, and I'm very linked to this person, Geraldo, to such a point that twice a year I would go visit him. Last year I did not go. This was in Israel. Have worked a great deal with Israel. In truth, I work with the entire world. I have I'm 29 years old, upside down. In truth, I am 92 years old at present. I still paint. I don't paint as much as before, but I continue to paint with a certain resistance because for 70 years I have been working arduously, and I've never had as much activity as I have now. Well, at present, I also do a great deal of other things. I now work 4 hours a day. I would like to thank you very much for your presence, Inos. I know that everything is more difficult now. You do have a problem with your voice. So I'm going to continue on with our live with Jacob, who is going to speak to us about his career, the week of modern art and modernism. Jacob, welcome, and you can begin your live. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to speak about this encounter. This is a very peculiar and very interesting encounter. For us, Inos represents the memory of art in this century. He is a man that has had a very important trajectory because of his European training in Italy, where he participated in the political and artistic life. He is a very rare figure. He is a war hero advocating for democracy in Italy. Now, in Brazil, Inos represented that tradition and his contact with significant artistic production in Bahia, especially Mario Cravo, who allowed Inos to become an artist connected to the roots of Brazil. In truth, for us, Inos represents the history of freedom in art, the type of work that he carries out is based on the Commedia dell'arte that began in the 15th century, and La Commedia dell'arte came about with Renaissance and represents a new way of thinking in the history of humanity. It is a type of freedom that arises at a time of thinking, and at the core of this thinking, you think about awareness, and we do not think about religious principles. And this is what represents the truth of the Renaissance. The Commedia dell'arte was a kind of work that was done an itinerant work. There were artists that would go through different cities representing plays. And they were all artists, and they had a cultural structure, a literary structure, but especially a gift, the gift of improvising. It was a scenario and a stage that were improvised in a home or in a park or in a palace or even in the public square. So this principle of freedom and improvisation is a principle which up to present is something that we greatly appreciate in contemporary art as a way of expression that frees the artist from well-established canons, not only in Brazil, but throughout the world. Perhaps Inos nowadays is the most representative artist, the one that is more faithful to this movement of the Commedia dell'arte. When I look at his work, when I look at this type of thinking, this love for improvisation, the idea of a scenario, that idea of the elements of nature, the sun, the moon, and nature as living characters that will create a sort of a structure, I think that his work is in truth a serious meditation, a meditation on freedom, on improvisation, with a humanistic context of contemporary art. So to hold alive with Inas for me is a true honor. I truly enjoy giving this type of testimony. And when we reflect on the cultural process, we always base ourselves on the production of an artist. We base ourselves on a type of creation. And in fact, this is what triggers the cultural process. On the other hand, Tarsilinha represents a great deal for us in Brazil. She resumes the idea of a great artist who is Tarsila do Amaral. She struggles so that this artist can be understood, that her circumstances can be understood, and she raises the flag of an artist who is not only one of the greatest artists we had in Brazil, she is also representative of the update of the icons and the meaning of things in Brazil. All of the faces of Tarsila and all of the process of her life are exemplary because they present an artist who is able to create in Brazil a type of art that still has a great deal of relationship with the art created worldwide. She does have a certain independence, creativity, and spontaneity that make her presence a framework in Brazilian art. We can define the Brazilian art before and after the advent of Tarsila because of the importance of her presence. And what is curious is that she did not participate in the Week of Modern Art. She is an artist that at time was outside of Brazil, but she came to Brazil, and when she came to Brazil, she brought with her that innovative thinking and that different way of considering Brazil as a matrix that had to be explored, that had to be identified, and had to be represented. And it is Tarsilinha who raises the flag of this innovative iconography and moves ahead step by step so that this representation can become ever more known. She carries out singular work in Brazil, work that should have been carried out by the state to preserve our culture, to develop our culture, to present our culture to our population, to recover the great cultural currents which we have in the country. But this is not done by the state. It is done individually. Each of us who works with art, with culture, and with reflection, in truth, does this permanently. It is a sort of donation. We all do this, although we are paid for the work that we carry out. In truth, we're all volunteers in this country. So first of all, I would like to speak about the importance of bringing together three currents of cultural production, Inos, Tarsilo, and myself. I reflect on the importance of culture and the importance of this meeting. It is as if it were a feast glorifying what we do best in this country. That's wonderful. That is truly fantastic. I'm impressed. Very interesting, Jacob. We could allow him to speak forever because he's so fantastic. He speaks about culture. It is true. I'm absolutely enchanted. My jaw drops based on what he has said. He's a walking, ambulating encyclopedia. It is true, Jacob. Congratulations. When you speak, you deserve a standing ovation. I'm not going to congratulate him because he has said very little, and congratulations are not sufficient. Enos, you are so terribly modest, naturally modest, and you don't understand the honor it is for us to be with you debating art and culture. You are a living testimony of what it is possible to do. And the most fantastic thing in art is not the belief in art, it is the belief that it is possible to do and that we must continue on. Because that is the idea that the human being is being in movement and that the movement is the trajectory. And if one day we look upon this trajectory on the design that has been made, we will see that that design is the destiny of a man. So this persistency for me is outstanding. It is an honor to be with you. Well, I insist it is my honor. Very well. Let us continue. I'm now going to give the floor to Tarsilinha. Tarsilinha, you have the floor, and please feel at ease. I feel very emotional with your words, Jacob. It is very good that this work has been acknowledged due to the difficulties that we face in this country. And thanks to my dedication, it is truly wonderful to hear what you had to say. And Inos, you are still very active. Your work is truly beautiful. Your history is very beautiful. And I would like to congratulate you for it. It is an honor to be here with both of you. Now, the story of my aunt is a very important story for the Brazilian art. The legacy is important. I have always known that, and I began to work with that. I thought that her work and her story of life should be better known. I believe that she should be not only recognized but also acknowledged. And that is why, as Jacob mentioned, I struggled for her to be acknowledged. I began to write books. I wrote a catalog, which was very important for an artist. I'm sure you know that as well as I do. Media, all the dissemination in media, this life here, any type of dissemination is of extreme importance so that an artist can be known and acknowledged. And during time, we have been able to occupy a very important space, not only in Brazil, but abroad. I have worked a great deal to be able to get to this point. Of course, if she did not have the quality that she had, her iconography that was so marvelous, no efforts would have been possible to obtain these results. But besides having some of the most important work in Brazil, I truly am very proud of what has been done. Now, working with Namat is always a great pleasure. I know of their work. I have become a friend of many of them, especially of Clarice, Miriam, and several of these marvelous women who have been working in this field, and I truly admire their work. Now, with the money that is collected from the sale of the reproductions made by my aunt, I know how this money is earmarked. I participate in everything. I went to Israel, and it was one of the most important trips in my life. Clarice was kind enough to show me everything, to tell me about everything, even in a place that she had visited several times. Despite this, she accompanied me to show me the work that they do not only in Brazil but also abroad. I will do whatever I can to help. I know that this money will always be invested in exceptional work that will help a great number of people. Once again, Clarice, thank you very much. I will always work side by side with you. It's a pleasure to work with you. Another point, they're always very careful, they're very patient with me. I'm always saying, this is not a very good detail, this color is not right. So to be able to get to these replicas or reproductions, it required a great deal of patience of the women at Namat to do something that truly has become excellent. These reproductions are made on a canvas, and those who acquire these canvases are always extremely satisfied with what they're buying. Once again, thank you very much for being able to be here with you. Tarsilinha, we would like to thank you for your support, the support of Inos, and the importance of your being with us is enormous. I believe that people want to know something about the week of modern art. I would like to ask Jacob and Tarsilinha, and either of you can begin speaking about this topic. If you could share with us the importance that it has up to present, whatever we should know about the week of modern art. This is a symbol. That is why it is important. In truth, the week had very few artists that were part of modernity, and basically this was geared to visual arts, the work of Victor Becheret, Enrico Monteiro, and the work of other artists that began to have contact with this new opening throughout the world. What is more important than the week of modern art itself is the idea of modernity and what this represents. Nowadays, contemporary art and modernity include a great diversity of things, and sometimes these are things that do not converse among themselves. For me, the idea of modernity began during the Renaissance with the idea of human awareness. substituting the idea of a mythic personality that holds the knowledge and moving to the idea of a human being that produces knowledge. The idea of modernity is nothing else than the expansion of awareness and coming closer to us. And we owe this to Cézanne. When Cézanne paints scenery or still nature, he shows that everything has the same value because these are things that are reflected by human awareness. He is not contemplating a scenery. The scenery is an idea that is within him. It is a cultural process where he is bringing together colors, weights, measures, the possibilities of a reflection that we have in chromatism. He is studying geometry, and in a certain way, he is the artist that has inaugurated all of this for us. When we see the explosion that we had with Cubism, with Picasso, Braque, and Juan Gris, we see this extraordinary use of time, which is multiple faceted time, concomitant time, a time which is different from other times. It is the time of the revolution of science, the revolution of physics. When we see this in Picasso, it is astounding. It is a project that unfolds, and we see the front of it and we see the back of it as if we were walking around the object, as if we were in all places, because this is divided time, multiple time, communicating time. When we see this, we owe all of this to Cézanne because Cézanne establishes this depth of the awareness. This is so significant when I think that the first theory of relativity written by Einstein dates back to 1905. The post-mortem retrospective of Cézanne is 1916, and the first Cubist canvas dates back to 1907, which means that there is that closeness in chronology, in time, restricted time, in human time, stages 1, 2, 3, 4. So for me, modernity is not a place of eccentricity, which sometimes appears, which is sometimes inclusive, which is adopted by the means of communication. In modernity, I see the control of thought, how to think about things and understand that things have their value based on human awareness. And this is valid for sociology, for psychology, for art, for the world in which we live. When with Freud, we see that he truly values, he discovers and resignifies a human being that we do not know through the unconscious, which is greater than the consciousness. He is giving us that idea that within us there coexists a conscious being and an ancestral being that knows everything and that gradually relates with awareness, and all of this becomes knowledge. So what Picasso does is precisely this. The idea of modernity is not an idea of something eccentric. It is an idea of experimentation in an experimental world, and the world relates to us according to our awareness. The idea of modernity is the idea that it is possible to build a world that is similar to human thought. And during that period, during these 150 years, we have had enormous hecatombs in humanity. This doesn't mean that humanity hasn't made strides. Nowadays, in the history of humanity, we do have something which is called the possibility of understanding others. Presently, we understand the civilizations that came before us and that they were capable of understanding. They could understand the world and their beliefs, their objects of study, their objects of belief, and their objects of development contain a specific value. We are able to know the others, and this is what we call alterity, which was written about so wonderfully by Martin Buber. It is precisely this recognition of the trajectory of humanity, of looking upon others with the same value as ourselves, and their thought, their development, because it was different from ours, should be highly valued. And this has brought to modernity the idea of art, ancestral art, totemic art, which is valued and which is a foundation for the work that is being carried out in the 20th century. A prodigy of an art that is fully authentic, that represented all the tribes and all civilizations. So the influence of African ancestral art in the creation of modern art is something extraordinary. But what is also extraordinary is the information that was collected from pre-Columbian art. When we have sculptures and when we create a sculpture, the hollows, those significant hollows, are the hollows that we find in pre-Columbian art. When this significant art has points that create a type of language, we know that we are looking upon Eskimo art. And when Picasso, Matisse, Braque, Juan Gris use the ancestrality of art, of African art specifically, what they are saying to us is that the world in modernity is a total world, is a world that represents for us, for the first time in the history of humanity, the possibility of bringing together all of the knowledge, all of the reflections, and not only the legacy, but everything that happened in humanity. So the idea of modernity for us is very significant. And that is why when we are speaking about modernity in Brazil, in Mexico, and elsewhere, we find points that are similar. They're very similar because in those sites, what is reflected is the idea of how to make the most of the world that exists and how to incorporate that world in our human conscience. And this is what is important in Tarsila, who was a leader of that way of thinking. She wasn't only a leader in Brazil, and we can compare this with the work of Lan in Cuba, with the work of Siqueiros in Mexico, with the work of Orozco, with the work that has been carried out in Europe in the search for that meaning. And these are the great contemporary currents. I wouldn't like to extend myself too much, but I believe that the idea of modernity is an idea of wealth, of splendor. And when we think that our main artist, which was Picasso, is as great as the great artists that we have had worldwide. And when we see that he devotes himself to collecting all of this, when we realize that he carried out 167 works based on the art of Velázquez, that he worked with grès, which was work that was not very admired at the time. He, through that structure and within modernity, was able to recompose the shapes that he wanted. He would give a new dimension to space and to figures, and this was extraordinary. We see that this is the trajectory of humanity. I think of him as a symbol because he worked with the two most significant ways in the Museum of 1907, which represents art for the sake of art, art absolute in its project. And he also created Guernica, which is engaged art, where he shows the reality of human beings and the destruction due to a totalitarian government. And throughout his life, the most important art project was a plastic object and the engagement to denounce what was happening. This is what I believe about modernity. Wonderful, Jacob. Your explanations are truly breathtaking. It is a pleasure to listen to them. I would like to ask Tarsila to speak about the link of Tarsila with the Week of Modern Art. And I would like to know if there will be something ahead of us for the centennial of modern art. You now have the floor, Tarsilinha. Thank you. It's very difficult to speak after Jacob. When I think about what Jacob says, my and when I think about my modest culture, I do believe that I owe him a great deal. No, you don't owe anything to anyone, Inos. You did excellent work and you continue to do it. And we hope you will continue until you are 120. This is what we expect from you. Oh, very well, Tarsilinha, you have the floor. Well, my focus will be on my aunt, not on the week of modern art, but a focus on my aunt. Well, art and Brazilian culture had in Tarsila, uh, at her splendor, very few people were like Tarsila. Very well. To speak a bit about my aunt and the week of modern art. She was not in Brazil, she was in Paris during that week, and she was a great friend of Anita Malfatti. And she heard about the week of modern art and this movement through Anita Malfatti. When she returned to Brazil in June, uh, for a week in February, she met the modernists, and this was very important for her. And of course, there was a couple, they worked together and they built a great deal together. Now, the inspiration of my aunt was due to the trip she carried out to Minas. We had the creation of Pau Brasil. We also had Abapuru when she was married to Oswald de Andrade, and they carried out the anthropophagic movement. Now, this was a very important movement. Both of them began to get to know each other, and they imbued excellence in their work. They were also part of the group of five that year, which was very important. This
Depois eles voltam para Paris, Tarsila e Oswaldo, em 1926, voltam para Paris. Aí ela tem mais um contato mais forte com a arte moderna. Ela conhece Picasso, Leger, tem aula com Leger, não só os pintores, mas também Brancusi, escultor, Stravinsky, músico, Eric Satie também, escritores como Grécia André e outros. Enfim, toda aquela intelectualidade, eu tenho certeza que isso ajudou também a formar um pensamento moderno nela, no Oswaldo, influenciou muito o trabalho dela, ela mesma foi o que mais a influenciou. E ela, na minha opinião, ela consegue realmente uma coisa muito original. Ela nas cores, as cores caipiras, né?
In the
Mostrar a
colors,
paisagem
the
brasileira, a
Brazilian
fauna, a flora, o
scenery,
povo
the
brasileiro.
fauna, the
Então,
flora,
isso
the
realmente ela
Brazilian
consegue
people.
fazer
This
de uma
is what
maneira
she is truly
mais
able to
expressiva.
do
Eu
in a
acho que
very
era o
expressive
pensamento de
fashion.
todos os
And
modernistas,
this
né?
was
Mas
the
eu acho que
thought
ela
of
acaba
all
também se tornando tão
modernists,
importante
but
porque
she ended up becoming
talvez tenha sido
extremely important
a artista
because
que
perhaps she
elevou
was
isso
the artist
na
who
maior potência
raised
mesmo,
this
né?
to its
Ela
greater
colocou
possibility,
mesmo o Brasil nas
potential.
obras dela.
She
Ela
included
foi
Brazil in her
inspirada em
work.
Paris, nas primeiras exposições que
She
ela foi
did this
papaya
in
lá. Isso foi
Paris,
muito
in the
importante para ela,
exhibitions
como
that she
artista
held
também,
there. This
para
was
todo
very
o
important for her
movimento
as an
aqui no
artist
Brasil.
and for the
E
entire
como eu falei,
movement in
isso culmina
Brazil.
com a Bapuru,
And as
que
I
é
mentioned, this culminates with
possivelmente o
Abapuru,
quadro mais
which is
importante da
very
arte
possibly
brasileira.
the most
Esse quadro
important
já nasce
painting in
histórico,
Brazilian art. It arises with all of this
inspirado
background
movimento, como um movimento
of being
antropofágico, tem
the
inspirado a
beginning
história
of a movement, an
dos judeus.
anthropophagic
Então, é realmente um quadro
movement.
icônico.
So
Falando um pouco até
it's
de
an
política
icon.
também, ela tem um
And
cunho
to speak
literário,
a
que é
bit
outro quadro
about
também que é
politics,
muito... realmente um marco na arte brasileira.
this is a
Também tem trabalho junto à
cornerstone
obra
in
dela. É o quadro
Brazilian
muito
art.
mais
I
pedido
work with her art,
já
and this is one of
por
the
diversos
paintings that is most requested. Everybody wants to use
diversidades.
this
Então, é
painting for
realmente
different
muito importante para a
goals.
nossa obra.
So this is a
Também
very
muito na exposição
important
do
part
MASP,
of her work. I
das pessoas
remember
se
at
sentirem
an
representadas
exhibition of
nesse quadro.
MASPI where people
Aí a
felt
gente tem
represented in this
todas as
painting.
raças, todas
We
as
have all of
cores,
the races, all
todos
of the
os credos,
colors, all of the
todos os níveis
beliefs,
sociais,
all of
enfim,
the
é um
different
quadro
social
representativo
brackets.
também para
And
o
this is a
Brasil. E,
painting that represents a great
e
deal
essa
for
fase mais
Brazil
pré-clássica, né?
and her
Esse quadro que ela já faz depois,
anthropophagic
o Abapuru, né?
phase.
A gente
And
tem
the
quadros
creation of
importantíssimos. Eu vou
Abapuru
destacar
led to
o
other
Arte
very
Lua, que
important
recentemente foi vendido
paintings.
pelo
We
MoMA.
have the
Então, é um
painting The
orgulho
Moon, a Lua,
enorme
that
para mim.
recently was
Estar
sold
hoje,
to
estar ao
MoMA,
lado de dois quadros
painting
fantásticos,
that was
como o
greatly
dela, o
appreciated.
quadro do
It is
Leger, do
presently
escultor
side
belga
by
também,
side
uma escultura do
with
Brasil,
paintings
que está bem
from
na frente, que também
Picasso.
era muito ambiente.
There is
Enfim,
also a
ela
sculpture
está lá
in
realmente
front of it. So
com os
she
grandes
is
artistas
there
mundiais e ela, hoje em dia,
with
também é
the
a
great
fashionista número
world
um.
artists, and presently she is being more acknowledged in Brazil.
Muito bem.
Very well.
A gente nota
Excelente, Inos quer
Excellent.
falar?
Tarsilinha. Inos, would you like to say something?
que o professor dela era o Leger. Ela tem muito.
Eu queria falar com vocês. Pela participação de todos vocês. Gostaria de saber se alguém tiver alguma pergunta.
I would like to thank all of you for your participation. Should there be a question, you can pose it now. And I do have a question both for Jacob and for Tarsilinha. The question is the following. In modern art, which was the change in art itself? Which was the greatest change? And if something happened after this, something that had the same impact of modernism.
Para mim foi Demoiselle d'Avignon.
For me, it would be Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, that was highly criticized by all critics. And afterwards, regretful, they praised this work of art. This was the painting that most impressed me, certainly by far. This is something that remained within me as the perhaps more illuminated painting in the history of art. I'm sorry, my memory is not what it used to be.
De que pintor?
Who are we speaking about here? Picasso. We're Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Yes, the Demoiselles d'Avignon in the first place as the springboard for modern art. And what is the name of that Spanish city that was massacred? Guernica. In my opinion, Guernica has no comparison. This modernity. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon inaugurated new avenues for humanity and did so immensely. Now, if we look at the work of Brancusi, this is, I'm referring to Constantino Brancusi, a Romanian. It is a work that is so connected with the choices of humanity. And we see the modernity of a bird of his, very similar to a megalithic bird. And he has that ability to carry out a new reading and modernize what was already modern in the prehistory of humanity. In truth, in art, we have to admit that a culture is always a new reading. We haven't come out of nothing. When modestly I play around with something, certainly behind this playfulness, we have something greater. And this is what is behind most of the artists of South America, most of the writers who refer to these origins. And art has that feature of being a rereading. Casimiro Livevich was a man who expressively encoded in his art what would be abstraction and something that was not figurative. And he did extraordinary work, white on white, black on white, black. And he says something in a letter to an extraordinary friend. He says, I am being accused of having eliminated the object, the figure, but in this abstraction that I work with, in this absence of the object, what is present is exactly nostalgia, memory of the object. Therefore, his work of the non-object also glorifies the object. If we look at the history of still natures, we see the transformation of human thought. Cézanne doesn't
do
need
impressionismo.
the
Ele não precisa do
glitter
fluxo
of
do pincel
impressionism.
dele.
He
Aliás,
doesn't
o
need to
brilho
have a
do
flowing
impressionismo surge
paintbrush.
do
All of this
estudo da
arises
gravura
from his
japonesa do século
study
XVII,
of
que
Japanese
valoriza a
engravings of the
autonomia do
17th
desenho.
century
Essas
and
coisas estão muito
values the
entrelaçadas.
autonomy of
De
design,
certa
and
maneira, o
everything is
impressionismo que
intertwined.
liberta
And
a
in
arte
a certain
da
way,
figuração e liga a arte ao fluxo
Impressionism
luminoso do
frees
mundo,
us from
ela tem
art,
uma origem muito
and
próxima
it
da
has its
gravura
origin
japonesa do
in
século
Japanese
XVII.
engravings of the
Na casa
17th
do Monet,
century.
que eu visitei, nas
In
paredes,
the
há
house of
uma
Monet that
coleção
I
de
visited, on the
gravadores
walls there
japoneses.
is a collection of Japanese engravers.
Então, é uma coisa extraordinária. Quando nós
So this is
pensamos
truly
nos
extraordinary
grandes escultores
when we
russos
think about the Russian
no início do
sculptors
século, é
at the
extraordinário o
beginning
que o
of the
Gabo fez,
century. It's
o que essa gente
extraordinary what
produziu.
Gabo did, what
Então,
these people
todos eles são
produced. So
iniciantes
all of
da
them are
arte
beginners
moderna que nós
in
conhecemos.
modern
A
art, the
própria
art that
ideia
we know now, the idea itself
do, de relacionar a arte com a
of
escrita,
relating art
que
with
nós vemos é um
writing
produto da
that we
nossa
see
época.
is a product of our
Então, tudo
times.
isso é o começo
So
da
all of this
modernidade.
is the beginning of
Não
modernity.
há, talvez, um fato que diga aqui começou a humanidade,
And we
a
don't have
modernidade,
a
porque é um espírito
painting
de
that
arte.
tells us that modernity
Tanto é que
began. It is a
quando
spirit of the
o
times,
nazismo
so much
condenou a arte
so
moderna,
that when
ele chamou de arte degenerada. E
Nazism
ele defendia uma
condemned
regressão.
modern art, they called it
Era
degenerate
baseado
art, a
no
regression.
elemento nos
And
mitos de
this was
Klintowitz.
based on myths.
Então, ele tinha uma ideia
They
de
had the
recorrer ao mito
idea
como
of
uma
recurring
regressão,
to
não
myths
como
as
um
being a
fragmento
regressing
do mundo
and
de
not
hoje,
as a
mas
myth
uma
that we
iluminação
understand
do
as
espírito,
something that
uma
lightens up our
iluminação do ser
spirit,
humano.
something that
A
lightens up
ideia de
human
Marx,
beings. The
que se
idea of
contempla na
Marxism
sua
is
plenitude, quando ele era
contemplated in its
e ele
fullness,
sente a ausência da
and
consciência
there is
e ele
that
mergulha
absence
na
of
arte,
awareness,
mergulha na
and
arte,
they
que é
dive
também
into
sinônimo
water, and
do
this is also
inconsciente.
a
Quando
synonym
o
of the
Marx quer
unconscious.
dizer,
They
busca uma nova
dive in the
identidade,
search of a
que
new
é a
identity,
consciência
which
humana.
is human
Então,
awareness.
essa ideia
Therefore, this
da
idea
modernidade
that
poderia ser uma
modernity could
degenerescência
be a
foi repetido em todas as instituições
degeneration, and this was repeated
todos
in
nós
all
também não pensamos.
authoritarian
É uma
systems. All
representação
totalitarian
moderna é um
governments think
instrumento
this
de
because
conhecimento.
myths are an instrument of
Nós lemos
knowledge.
a tragédia
They
grega,
enable
nós
us to
aprendemos
read
com aquele
Greek
lema
tragedy, and
grande
Greek
pintor
tragedy
como
is nothing
francês,
more
que
than
quando ele ia
a
todo
great
dia
painter, for
corrigir,
example,
ele lia
Francis
a tragédia
Bacon,
grega.
who would
Todas
read
as manhãs de
Greek
manhã,
tragedies
nós
every
lia
morning of
uma
his
tragédia
life in
grega.
his
Ele
studio.
lia
He
essa,
would read
porque aquele
a
drama,
Greek strategy
aquele
because
confronto
that drama,
das
that
ideias, da
confrontation
ideia de
of ideas,
cidadania,
of the idea of
da tragédia grega,
citizenship
dava
in
vida
Greek
para ele poder
tragedies
pintar,
allowed
chamava
him
isso
the environment
o
to be able
confronto.
to paint, and he would
Então,
call
eu
this
acho
a
que o
trigger.
surgimento da arte
So
moderna,
the
mais
advent
recentemente,
of modern art more
é
recently
literalmente espraiado em várias
literally
culturas.
is spread among several different cultures.
Bom, pessoal, quero agradecer a
Very
participação de
good. I would
todos.
like
Foi
to thank
muito
all of you for your
prestigiar vocês.
participation. It has been
Espero que a
very
gente possa
important for us to
futuramente
have you
fazer
here with
outros,
us.
fazer mais
We
lives,
hope that we can meet on other occasions to have more lives to speak about art
e
and
agradeço a
culture to
todos que puderam
everybody. I would
compartilhar,
like to thank all of
adquirir uma
those who
das bonecas que nós
participated
temos
and
oferecido. Foi
acquired one
muito,
of the
muito importante
reproductions that we are
vocês
offering.
escolherem
This is
adquirir
very
esse tipo
important.
da
As you
arte.
can see, we have the
Qualquer pessoa que
Namad
quiser
account
adquirir,
here. If you
essa
want
graça
to
de ouro.
acquire these
Se alguém
reproductions,
quiser
we
enviar
do
para mim,
deliver
envia
them at your home throughout Brazil. And if you
pode,
want to write to Brazil,
e pode
it
mandar
is
e-mail para
namad@.org.br. you can contact us through that address. I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope you have absorbed quite a bit of knowledge. We will now bid farewell. We are somewhat beyond our time. Once again, I would truly like to thank Jacob, Tarsilinha, and Inos for their participation, and we thank all of you for donating your time and for accompanying us tonight. Thank you very much. Nama would like to thank all of you.
Obrigada.
Desculpe
Foi
o
um
meu.
prazer.
Muito obrigada a todos.
Pode me seguir também. Tchau, um beijo. Dois beijos. Dois beijos para
Jacob, a big hug and a hug to everybody else. Thank you, and for you too. It has been a pleasure.